The vote was already over when I walked into the chamber. I knew it before I crossed the threshold. I could tell by the way the Kethra delegates were sitting, leaned back, arms folded, wearing those wide, flat grins that passed for satisfaction among their kind. I could tell by the way the Shinari wouldn't look at me. Not embarrassment, convenience. Avoiding my eyes cost them nothing, and they had always been good at spending nothing on us. My name is Ashamaran. I have represented the human species before the Galactic Concord for 11 years. I have sat in that chamber through droughts and famines and plagues on worlds I will never visit, voted in favor of aid packages my own government funded, and smiled through 300 years of accumulated contempt, dressed up in diplomatic language. That day I sat in my assigned seat, the one furthest from the central dais, the one with the smallest display screen and the worst acoustic feed, and I read the result of the vote on my tablet before the Grand Speaker even cleared his throat. Resolution 7 Gamma Null, passed by 31 votes to 9. Humanity's observer status within the Galactic Concord was formally revoked. Earth and its 7 colony worlds were to be reclassified under the Resource Designation Framework. What that meant, in plain language, was this. We were no longer guests at the table. We were the table. The Concord had decided, with a majority vote and zero consultation, that humanity's worlds were too valuable to be governed by humanity alone, and that our species was, and I am quoting the resolution directly here, demonstrably too emotionally reactive for full participatory membership in a rules-based galactic order. Emotionally reactive. That was the phrase they chose. I sat with it for a moment. I let it settle the way cold water settles into the lungs, slowly, completely, all the way to the bottom. The Grand Speaker, Veldaro of the Kethra, began his formal reading of the resolution in that deep, resonant voice they all admired so much. He had been Grand Speaker for 40 years. In that time, he had presided over the rejection of 4 human membership applications, the restructuring of 2 human-funded aid programs into Concord-managed initiatives that cut Earth out of governance entirely, and the quiet redistribution of navigational rights through human-claimed space to Kethra commercial fleets. He had done all of this with perfect procedural correctness, every vote clean, every ruling by the book. The book, of course, being one they wrote before humanity had even reached its own moon. I looked around the chamber while he spoke. The Vorkai delegates were the only ones who looked uncomfortable. Old Councillor Preth had his 4 upper eyes closed, which among his species was a sign of deep distress. I understood why. 70 years ago, when the Vorkai homeworld was being consumed by the Wrath Plague, a hemorrhagic fever that tore through their population at a rate of 40,000 deaths per day, it was human doctors who arrived first. Not Kethra medical ships, not Shinari relief convoys, human volunteers, in retrofitted cargo vessels, with medicines they synthesized using research they shared freely, and patents they waived without negotiation. We lost 214 people to that plague. They recovered. They sat here now, silent and uncomfortable, while the species that saved them was voted into property status. I did not blame Preth, not then. He was 1 vote, and the arithmetic had not been on his side. The Shinari were easier to read. Their delegation lead, a bureaucrat named Osik Vel, had the practiced stillness of someone who had made peace with something he knew was wrong. The Shinari had fought a border conflict with the Dethian Collective 43 years ago. A grinding, ugly war over a chain of mineral-rich moons that cost them more lives than they could reasonably sustain. Humanity had sent a voluntary expeditionary force. We had no legal obligation. No formal treaty compelled us. We sent 40,000 soldiers because the Shinari asked, and because we were the kind of species that said yes when people were suffering. We lost over 8,000 of those soldiers. The Shinari named a memorial after them. Then, 15 years later, they sold the navigation rights to those same moons to a Kethra commercial consortium and forgot to mention it to Earth. The Dethian delegates were not even bothering to hide their satisfaction. They had opposed human membership in the Concord since the beginning. Their argument had always been philosophical, that species capable of the irrational emotional attachment humans displayed were inherently unpredictable, and unpredictable species were a liability to galactic order. What they meant, and what everyone in the chamber understood perfectly well, was that humans were too hard to control. We gave aid without asking for leverage in return. We signed treaties based on principle rather than calculation. We were, in the Dethian view, broken, not because we were weak, but because we refused to behave the way power was supposed to behave. They were not entirely wrong about us, but they had misread the reason. We were not incapable of calculation. We simply had a longer timeline than they expected. Veldaro finished reading the resolution and looked directly at me. He had the courtesy, or perhaps the theater, to pause, as if offering me the floor for a response. Around the chamber, a few delegates shifted in their seats. Some were curious. Most, I think, were expecting me to argue, to file an injunction, to invoke Article 14 of the Concord Charter, which guaranteed observer species the right to appeal reclassification votes before a full tribunal. I stood up. I reached up and removed my diplomatic sash. It was a narrow band of deep blue fabric embroidered with Earth's designation sigil, the one we had been issued when we were first granted observer status 18 years ago. I had worn it every day since my appointment. I folded it carefully, the way my mother had taught me to fold things. Corners first, then thirds, then the final flat rectangle that took up almost no space at all. I placed it on the table in front of me. Then I picked up my tablet, logged out of the chamber's secure network, and walked to the door. Nobody spoke. I think they expected me to turn around. I did not. Outside in the long corridor that connected the chamber to the diplomatic transit hub, I found a bench and sat down. I was not trembling, I want to be clear about that. I was not in shock, and I was not afraid. I was experiencing something much quieter and much more permanent. It was the feeling of a decision finalizing, not being made, because it had been made long before that room, long before that vote, long before Valdero's procedurally perfect contempt, but finalizing, becoming real, becoming irreversible. I opened a secure channel on my personal communicator, not the diplomatic one, my personal one, the one registered to me as a private citizen of Earth, not as a representative of anything. I typed 2 words and sent them to the one address in my contacts that had been waiting for 11 years for exactly this message. Then I sat in that corridor for a long time, listening to the ambient hum of a station that had never once made us feel welcome, and I thought about my mother's hands folding laundry. I thought about the names on the Shinari Memorial that nobody visited anymore. I thought about Dr. Yun, who had died in a Vorkai Field Hospital at 32 years old, of a plague that was not his and a cause that was not his obligation, because he had believed we had all believed that being good was its own sufficient reason. We had been good for a very long time. It was a long time, and it was over. The ship that brought me home was a civilian liner, nothing remarkable about it from the outside. White hull, standard Concord transit markings, a registration number that matched a freight and passenger company out of the Ganymede hub. I had traveled on dozens of ships like it over the years, but this one felt different the moment I boarded, though I could not immediately say why. The crew was too quiet, not unfriendly. Every one of them greeted me with a nod, processed my boarding pass efficiently, showed me to a cabin that was clean and comfortable. But there was a particular kind of stillness about them, a focused quiet. The kind you feel in a room full of people who all know something and are waiting for the right moment to say it. I did not push. I ate the meal they brought me, slept for 6 hours, and when I woke, the ship was already decelerating toward Earth's orbital approach corridor. I had not been home in 20 years. I had spent 11 of those years at the Concord station. Before that, 9 years posted at various embassy outposts across 3 different states, always representing, always observing, always the human face in rooms designed to make that face feel small. I had sent transmissions home regularly. I had seen my brother's children grow up in short video clips. I had watched Earth's cityscapes change in news feeds. But I had not stood on actual ground, breathed actual air, felt actual gravity that belonged to the planet where I was born. When the ship dropped below the cloud layer on final approach and I saw the Atlantic coast through the cabin window, the dark green of the northern forests, the shimmer of the ocean, the scattered lights of the coastal cities just starting to glow as the sun set, I pressed my hand flat against the glass and held it there. Then the ship landed at a military installation I did not recognize. That was the first surprise. The coordinates on the approach manifest had listed a civilian hub outside of Halifax. We had landed in a facility carved into the rock of a coastal range, with hangar doors that had closed behind us before the engines had fully cycled, down lighting that was operational but minimal. I had no idea this place existed. Admiral Carla Torres was waiting for me at the bottom of the ramp. I had known Carla Torres by reputation for years, and by a handful of encrypted dispatches over the past decade. She was 61 years old, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of posture that suggested her spine had been replaced with something sturdier at some point in her service. She was wearing a uniform that I did not recognize, not the standard Earth Defense Forces configuration I had last seen before my posting. This one was darker, with no visible rank insignia and an emblem on the chest that I had never seen before. A simple open hand, fingers together, facing down, not a fist, not a salute. An open hand, pointing down. She did not salute me, she shook my hand. "Commander Marin," she said. "Welcome back. We have a lot to show you, and not much time to explain it gently, so I'm going to skip the gentle. She turned and walked, and I followed her, and nothing I saw for the next 4 hours was anything I was prepared for. The facility was enormous. That was the first thing. It extended far deeper into the rock than the surface entry suggested, and as Torres walked me through it, briskly, pausing only when I stopped involuntarily, I began to understand that this was not one facility, it was one node. She confirmed this when I asked. There are 47 installations like this one, she said, across every continent and 3 deep-sea sites. This is mid-tier in terms of capacity. You want to see the largest one? It's under the Tibetan Plateau. I'll take you there after you've had time to process the shock on your face. I was not going to argue with her assessment of my face. The ships were the second thing. I had seen them from the air on approach, without understanding what I was looking at. I had assumed they were the standard civilian freight haulers that the facility manifest described. They were not. They were warships. Long, flat-hulled, with weapons arrays folded tight against their chassis in configurations I had studied in classified military theory files but never expected to see, in physical form. 14 of them in this hangar alone. Torres told me, without emphasis, as if she were describing furniture inventory, that across all 47 installations, the total fleet count was currently 14,208 vessels. I stopped walking. 14,000, I said. And 208, she confirmed. Plus 612 support craft, 41 logistics carriers, and 9 command vessels. The Concorde's entire combined military fleet across all 31 member species is approximately 11,000 combat-rated ships, most of which are aging hulls on maintenance cycles that our intelligence considers optimistic. She paused. We have been monitoring their readiness levels for 60 years. I looked at her. Who knows about this? Everyone who needed to. Nobody who didn't. She said it simply without pride or drama. Commander, you need to understand something. Your predecessor, Ambassador Cole, before she retired, she sent the same kind of message you sent. Different 2 words, but the same meaning. She sent it 32 years ago, after the second membership rejection. The program didn't start because of your message. Your message was confirmation. It told us the diplomatic window had closed. I thought about the sash I had folded and left on a table in the Concorde chamber. I thought about all the times I had been told to be patient, to maintain goodwill, to trust the process. The soldiers, I said. Where did you find 14,000 ships worth of trained crew? Torres almost smiled. You know the Disaster Relief Corps? I knew them. Every human did. 40 years of volunteer service, deploying to crisis zones across the galaxy. Floods, volcanic events, structural collapses on mining colonies, medical emergencies. The most widely respected humanitarian organization in the known galaxy. The HFY had publicly praised them on 3 separate occasions. They're not just a relief organization, I said. It was not a question. They are also that, Torres said. Every person who serves in the DRC receives full emergency response training, logistics coordination training, and field medical training. They also receive, in a program nested inside the standard curriculum, combat training equivalent to Tier 2 military specialization. We rotate 60,000 personnel through it every year. Over 40 years, that is a significant number of trained people who know how to work under pressure, follow orders in chaotic environments, and keep each other alive. She opened a door and we stepped into a briefing room. On the wall was a display showing a galactic map, not the Concorde's standard political map, with its color-coded territories and approved transit lanes. This one was annotated differently. Debt markers, resource flows, military deployments cross-referenced with dates of human aid agreements. Lines connecting every favor humanity had ever done to every species that had taken it. We helped them build their defenses, I said. Looking at the map. We helped them win their wars. We know all of it. We know all of it, Torres agreed. Every vulnerability we helped them patch. We documented. Every weapon system we helped them develop or improve. We kept the original schematics. We were generous with our knowledge. We kept very careful records of what we were generous with. I stood in front of that map for a long time. The Concorde had looked at humanity and seen charity workers. People who gave because they were soft, who helped because they were naive, who smiled because they lacked the strategic intelligence to do otherwise. They had built an entire political framework around managing us, limiting us, using us, because they assumed our goodness was the same as our limitation. They had never once considered that a species capable of 300 years of genuine, sustained, self-sacrificing goodwill might also be capable of 300 years of patience. Those are not different things. They come from the same place. Torres handed me a folder. Physical paper, a deliberate choice. I understood now. Nothing digital. Nothing that could be intercepted or accessed remotely. Inside, one page. The terms, she said. What we're asking for, if they respond to our withdrawal notice. I read through them slowly. Full sovereign recognition. Repayment of documented aid debts, restructured across 50 years. A permanent seat on the Concord High Council with full voting rights. And a formal galactic record. Published, archived, non-retractable, acknowledging the specific contributions of humanity to the safety, health, and stability of Concord member species across 3 centuries. That last one was Torres's doing, I was certain of it. It was not a strategic demand. It was something else, something that mattered in a different way. The message goes out tomorrow, Torres said. Formal withdrawal from observer status. Cancellation of all active aid contracts and DRC deployments. The debt ledger, with a payment deadline of 90 days. And if they don't pay, she looked at me steadily. Then in 91 days, you and I will be standing on the bridge of the command vessel. And you will give the order. Because I want a diplomat to be the one who starts this. I want the record to show that the last person we sent was the person who tried the hardest. I looked down at the map again. All those lines. All that history. They're going to laugh, I said, when they read the message. They're going to broadcast it and laugh. I know, Torres said. Let them. She was quiet for a moment then. She said something I have thought about every day since. We didn't build this because we wanted to frighten them, Commander. We built it because we were tired of needing their permission to exist. Whatever happens next, we will not be asking anyone for anything ever again. That night I slept in a bunk in the facility, deep in the rock, with the sound of 14 warships breathing in the hangar above me, and I did not dream of anything gentle. The Concorde's response came in 6 days. Not 90. 6, not payment, not negotiation, a broadcast open frequency galaxy-wide from Veldaro himself, flanked by the full Kethra delegation, recorded in the Grand Chamber with all the ceremony and staging they could arrange on short notice. He was smiling, that same flat, wide smile I had watched for 11 years. He called our withdrawal notice a performance of wounded pride. He described the debt ledger as a creative work of fiction, he said. And this part was translated into 17 languages and broadcast across every major Concorde relay. That humanity's response to being gently corrected was proof, if any more proof were needed, of exactly the emotional instability that had made full membership impossible in the first place. He closed the broadcast with a phrase that became, in the weeks that followed, something of a galactic joke, a meme in the communication style of younger species, merchandise even, on at least 4 Kethra commercial platforms. Let the bleeding hearts bleed themselves dry. I watched the broadcast from the bridge of our command vessel, the hand sigil on its hull still fresh, engines warm, crew at station. Torres stood beside me. She said nothing. She did not need to. I looked at the tactical display in front of me. 14,208 ships, 60 years of preparation, 300 years of patience. I thought about Dr. Yoon, who died at 32 in a field hospital on a world that did not belong to him. I thought about 8,000 names on a memorial in Shinari space that nobody visited. I thought about blue Susash folded into a small rectangle on a table in a chamber that had never once taken us seriously. Then I thought about Veldaro's smile and the galaxy laughing along with him. Day 91 arrived. No payment had come. I stood at the command console with Torres at my right shoulder and a crew of 240 people behind me who had all, at some point, believed deeply in the value of being decent to others. Some of them had served in the DRC. Some had relatives whose names were on memorials on other worlds. All of them had grown up in a civilization that had taught them, correctly, that kindness was a strength. None of them had forgotten that. But they had also learned, as I had, that a strength never demonstrated is a strength never believed. I gave the order. What followed was not chaotic. It was not angry, in the way an emotion is angry. It was precise. It was the output of 6 decades of preparation, executed by people who had trained for exactly this moment. Our first objective was the Kethra Primary Resupply Network, a chain of 7 orbital stations connecting their home system to their 3 largest colony clusters. Those stations had been built using a construction loan from the Earth Economic Development Fund, issued 40 years ago, never repaid, never acknowledged in any Concorde debt discussion. We had the original engineering schematics. We had helped design the docking protocols. We knew every approach vector and every defensive gap. I was on the bridge of the lead command vessel when we dropped from transit speed into the operational zone. The first Kethra patrol ships we encountered were running on standard patrol rotation, predictable, comfortable, the rotation of a navy that had never seriously expected to be tested. They responded to our approach with hailing signals and warnings. Torres had instructed all our captains to respond to every hail before engaging, not a gesture of courtesy, a matter of record. Every Concorde relay in range would capture the exchange. We would not be the species that attacked without announcing ourselves. Our captains responded. They stated who we were. They stated what we were there for. They read on open channel the specific station designation, the loan reference number, the date of issue, the amount outstanding with 40 years of accrued interest, and the date our payment demand had expired. Then they stated that we were here to enforce the terms. The patrol ships did not stand down. Of course they did not. What happened next was fast, and from a purely technical standpoint, overwhelming. The Keth-Ra patrol force was not small. 12 combat vessels, well-maintained, crewed by experienced people. Under normal circumstances, against a force they considered equivalent, they would have been formidable. These were not normal circumstances. Our vessels were faster by a factor that their tactical computers, when they ran the numbers, apparently refused to accept as accurate. Our targeting systems had been refined over 60 years using data collected from every engagement we had supported across the galaxy. We had not just watched other species fight their wars. We had taken notes. The engagement was over before the resupply station they were protecting had time to close its docking bay doors. I did not feel satisfaction when the patrol ships disengaged. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something closer to sorrow. A sorrow that lived underneath the necessity, that acknowledged the cost of a moment like this, even when the moment was just. The Keth-Ra crew members on those ships were not the ones who had written Resolution 7 Gamma Null. They were people doing a job, defending infrastructure they had been assigned to defend. In another life, in another history, we might have helped them repair that infrastructure. We might have sat down together. But we were not in that history, we were in this one. The station surrendered within the hour. I had ordered our boarding teams to treat all personnel inside with full medical standards, to document everything they found in the station's operational logs, and to leave any Keth-Ra civilian contractors completely unharmed and undetained. Our people followed those orders without exception. When the Keth-Ra station commander, a lean older officer named Brexul, who clearly expected very different treatment than what he received, was brought before me on a secure feed, I told him plainly that his crew would be evacuated to the nearest Keth-Ra population center on a vessel of their choosing, that the station itself would remain under human administration until our debt was formally acknowledged, and that he personally would receive a full copy of the debt ledger, so that he could pass it to whoever in the Keth-Ra government had previously decided it did not exist. He looked at me for a long time. He said nothing. But the way he looked at me was different from how any Keth-Ra official had ever looked at me before. He was not smiling. Over the next 2 weeks, we secured all 7 resupply stations. We encountered resistance at 4 of them, heavier than the first, as the Keth-Ra scrambled to reinforce after losing the first station. Each engagement was harder than the last, and our people were not without losses. I will not pretend otherwise. We lost 26 crew members in total across the 7 operations. I read every name. I wrote letters to every family. I did it myself, by hand, because that was the only way I knew how to carry it honestly. Meanwhile, the Concorde was doing what it always did when confronted with something it had not planned for. It called an emergency session. Intelligence reports from our assets inside the Concorde diplomatic network reached Torres every 6 hours. The picture they painted was one of genuine disarray. The Concorde had spent so long managing humanity as a peripheral, predictable variable that they had no contingency for this. Their military planning committees had assessed Earth's defense capacity at a level equivalent to a mid-tier colony world. That assessment was now, diplomatically speaking, in the trash. The proposal that emerged from the emergency session was a combined fleet deployment. 31 member species, approximately 4,000 ships, drawn from whatever each species could mobilize on short notice. The fleet assembled at the Keth-Ra home system's outer defensive perimeter and broadcast a demand for our withdrawal. I read the demand on the bridge and then read it again. They wanted us to withdraw, return all assets seized, submit to a formal arbitration process, and present a written apology to the Grand Council. An apology. Torres, standing at my shoulder, said nothing. She was waiting. I thought about the 47 installations carved into the rock of the planet I had been born on. I thought about 60,000 people rotating through a program that taught them both how to deliver emergency medical care and how to fight in the kind of chaos that made emergency medical care necessary. I thought about the map in the briefing room. All those lines, all that history, all that careful documentation. Then I thought about the apology. Get me a channel to the combined fleet, I said. Torres nodded to the communications officer. I spoke for 4 minutes. I did not apologize. I told them who we were, what we had done for 300 years, what we were owed, and what we were willing to accept as a resolution. I told them that our terms were the same 37 lines they had already received, and that we were not interested in arbitration run by institutions that had already voted to reclassify us as property. I told them that we had no desire to harm anyone, that we would not target civilian infrastructure or population centers, and that every person captured or detained under our operations would be treated with full medical and humanitarian standards. Then I told them that we had 14,000 ships, and that we were not leaving. The silence on the open channel lasted a full 11 seconds. I counted, then a voice came through, not Veldaro, a Shinari admiral, a species we had bled for on a border conflict 4 decades ago. Commander Marin, he said. You cannot be serious. Admiral, I said. I have never been more serious in my life. He cut the channel. The combined Concorde fleet held position for 3 days. There were no further engagements during those 3 days, but I was not fooled by the quiet. Their commanders were running calculations. They were looking at the data from the 7 resupply station engagements. They were seeing numbers that did not match what they had been told to expect from us. On the 4th day, I received a private encrypted transmission. Not from Veldaro, not from the Shinari Admiral, from Councillor Preth of the Vorkai. The message was brief. He said he could not speak on behalf of his government officially, not yet, but that there were those among the Vorkai who had not forgotten what happened 70 years ago. He said that if I could share our operational plans confidentially, he believed he could help ensure that at least part of the Concorde Coalition would develop reasons not to engage. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I shared what I could, enough to demonstrate our objectives were limited, our conduct disciplined, our terms specific, enough to show we were not there to conquer, we were there to be heard. Preth had 4 upper eyes. He kept 2 of them open this time. Within a week, 3 species had quietly withdrawn their vessels from the combined fleet, citing domestic resupply issues and scheduled maintenance cycles. Nobody was fooled. But everyone understood the message. The coalition was cracking, and it was cracking from the inside, because humanity had spent 300 years doing things for people that those people had not forgotten. Not all of them, not completely. The Kethra were still formidable. Their core fleet, the ships they had not pooled into the combined force, numbered nearly 2,000 vessels, all of them defending home territory with the particular ferocity of a species that had never lost a home engagement in recorded history. We were not planning to test that record the way they expected. While the combined Concorde fleet watched our main force and held its position, Torres had deployed 3 secondary groups on routes we had planned for years using navigational data the Kethra had trusted us to help them develop. We did not go for the home system. We went for the supply chains, the fuel processing platforms, the long-range communication relays, the orbital manufacturing stations that produced the replacement components for their aging warship engines. Not destruction, capture, secured, documented, crewed with our people, and formally logged under the debt ledger as partial repayment against outstanding obligations. It was, Torres told me one evening on the bridge, the most expensive accounting exercise in galactic history. I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in weeks, and it felt strange in my chest, like a muscle being used after a long period of disuse. But later that night, alone in my cabin, I did not feel like laughing. I pulled up the crew casualty list, 49 names now, updated since my last reading. I sat with them. I thought about what each of those people had believed when they signed up for the DRC. They had believed in something generous. They had trained for disaster relief because they wanted to help people who were suffering. And someone had quietly, over years, folded into that same training the tools for a very different kind of work. Had they known? Some of them, certainly. Others I was not sure. And the ones who had not known when the moment came, and they were in the middle of an engagement that was nothing like flood rescue or volcanic evacuation. What had they felt? I thought about that question a great deal. Being right is not the same as being at peace with what being right costs you. We were right. I had no doubt about that. 300 years of documentation, of unrepaid kindness, of taken advantage of decency. We were right. The Concorde had wronged us in ways that were specific, recorded, and undeniable. But the 49 names on my screen were not interested in being right. They were just gone. I kept those names close. I carried them as a weight, deliberately, because I thought the weight was important. A version of this war without that weight, clean, strategic, purely mechanical, was a version I did not want to win. If we came out of this and found that we had left our grief behind somewhere, traded it for something harder and colder, then we would have lost the most important thing, even if we won every engagement. I would not let that happen. Not on my watch. The crisis point came in the 6th week. Our secondary groups had been extraordinarily effective. The Kethra supply network was degraded. Their communication relays were down to 40% capacity. 3 of their major manufacturing platforms were under human administration. Their combined fleet partners were restless and fragmenting, and Torres brought me a tactical option. The Shinari homeworld was not defended as well as anyone had assumed. Our intelligence, compiled from navigational data, structural surveys, and engineering reports accumulated across decades of cooperative programs, indicated that their primary orbital defense grid had a sector gap, not huge, but workable. A strike force of 300 ships, positioned correctly, could reach communication and infrastructure targets in the upper atmosphere without engaging the main defensive grid at all. It would be a significant blow to Shinari operational capacity. It would almost certainly accelerate the end of the conflict. Torres did not recommend it. She presented it as an option and stood back. I looked at the tactical display for a long time. The Shinari, the species we had sent 40,000 soldiers to help. The species that had named a memorial after the 8,000 we lost on their behalf, and then sold the territory those soldiers died defending to a commercial consortium without telling us. I could feel it, the logic of the move, the clean arithmetic of shortening the conflict, reducing overall casualties by striking decisively rather than grinding through 6 more weeks of engagement. The argument was not wrong on its own terms, but I thought about the Shinari civilians, the ones who had nothing to do with Osikvel's vote in the Concord chamber. The ones who grew up knowing there was a memorial to human soldiers in their territory, who perhaps visited it, who perhaps felt something genuine standing in front of all those names. The ones who were, in the end, not their government any more than our soldiers had been their governments. No, I said. Torres nodded once, slowly. Not disappointment. I think it was relief. We hold the current lines, I said. We tighten the economic pressure. We let the coalition continue to fracture. We do not touch civilian infrastructure. And we do not touch population centers. And if that means this takes longer and costs us more, then that is what it costs. She nodded again. The record will show, I said, exactly what we did and exactly what we refused to do. That matters. It does, she agreed. I turned back to the display and thought about the 49 names, and then the 8,000 names on a memorial somewhere in Shinari space, and then Dr. Yoon at 32 years old in a field hospital. The record would show all of it. Every bit of it. Week 8 brought something unexpected. Preth requested a direct communication, not encrypted this time, not private, an open channel request, logged formally through the Concord's own relay network. He was not hiding what he was doing. When I accepted the call, he had 2 of his 4 upper eyes open, and the other 2 were visible rather than closed. A Vorkai expression I did not immediately recognize, until he explained it. That expression in your species, he said. I believe the closest equivalent is being present for something that has been a long time coming. Counselor, I said carefully, this channel is open. I am aware, he said. I am also aware that in 70 years, my species has never once formally thanked yours. Not in a recorded session, not in any official Concord document, not in any way that could be found in the archives by someone looking. He paused. That ends today. What followed was 11 minutes. Preth, on an open Concord relay channel, in his formal counselor voice, read a complete account of the Vorkai plague and the human response to it. Names of doctors, dates of arrival, numbers of lives saved, including a detailed breakdown by colony region that I had never seen collated in a single document before. The names of 214 humans who died there. He read every one of those names aloud. Then he read a formal declaration of Vorkai withdrawal from the combined fleet, citing the specific Concord Charter article that permitted a species to withdraw from collective military action it considered unjust. And then, and this was the part that I had to replay twice to believe, he read a prepared statement from 4 other counselors who had signed on to the Vorkai position. 2 of them were from species I had helped during my own diplomatic tenure. One was a species that had received DRC assistance during a seismic disaster on their primary colony 12 years ago. The combined fleet, when the transmission ended, was down to 19 species. Torres stood beside me and said absolutely nothing. Sometimes silence is the most honest response to something. Over the following 2 weeks, the coalition degraded from 19 to 11 to 6. Veldaro was furious. Our intelligence reports captured several internal Kethra communications that I will summarize only as revealing of the kind of language a grand speaker uses when he has stopped performing for an audience. He attempted to hold the remaining coalitions together through a combination of economic pressure and appeals to Concord unity. He called Preth a traitor. He called the withdrawing species cowards. He reminded everyone of the rules-based galactic order that the Concord represented. Nobody was particularly moved. On day 51 of the conflict, I received a private channel request from a source I had not expected. Veldaro, not an open broadcast, not a formal diplomatic communique, a direct private channel, voice only, with no staging and no ceremony. He sounded older than the last time I had heard his voice. Or perhaps that was just the absence of performance. Commander Marin, he said. Grand Speaker, I replied, a long pause. What does your species want? He asked. The phrasing was direct in a way I had never heard from him before. Not procedural, not diplomatic, a real question. I did not answer immediately. I pulled up the 37-line document that Torres had handed me in the briefing room under a mountain in Nova Scotia 8 weeks ago. I read through it. Then I set it aside, because I knew it well enough by then to say it from memory, I told him. Full sovereign recognition, debt repayment, restructured and fair, permanent seat on the High Council, and the formal galactic record of what we had done and what had been done to us. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for long enough that I checked the channel was still open. Then he said, the last item, the record. Yes, I said. That is the one you will not negotiate away. It was not a question. He understood it perfectly. No, I said. That one stays. Another silence. We will need 30 days, he said finally. You have 30 days, I said. The channel closed. Torres appeared at my shoulder. She had been in the room for the entire conversation, silent. He'll try to water down the record clause, she said. He might, I said. Will you hold it? I looked at the casualty list on my secondary screen. Still 49 names. No new engagements in the past 72 hours. The Kethra fleet had pulled back from the outer engagement zones. The conflict, not with a thunderclap but with something quieter and more permanent, had entered a different phase. Yes, I said. Every word. She nodded. Then I think we're going to be all right, she said. I wasn't sure I would have used the word all right. But I understood what she meant by it. The next 30 days were harder than the fighting had been. Negotiations are always harder than fighting, in my experience. Fighting is terrible, but it is at least honest about what it is. Negotiations are fighting conducted through language, which means every move is dressed up in courtesy, and the dressed-up courtesy makes it exhausting in a way that no amount of tactical tension quite matches. The Kethra legal team was expert. They were, I will acknowledge without pleasure, genuinely skilled at what they did. They sent counter-proposals that addressed the spirit of our terms while quietly hollowing out the substance. The debt restructuring was feasible. The sovereign recognition language was acceptable. The High Council seat could be arranged. But the record clause kept returning in forms that were subtly different from what we had asked for. Conditional language, scope limitations. A proposal that the recorder be filed in a restricted archive accessible only to member governments rather than publicly posted. A proposal that it cover only the past 50 years rather than the full 3 centuries. A proposal that it acknowledge contributions in general terms without the specific itemization we had demanded. I rejected every version, not angrily, carefully, clearly in writing, with a specific explanation of exactly which language was unacceptable and why. I had Torres with me in every session. I also had a woman named Dr. Nina Cole, no relation to the former ambassador, who had spent 20 years as a linguistic analyst for the Earth Diplomatic Corps and could identify a weasel clause at 40 paces. Nina sat across from the Kethra legal team and matched them word for word, day by day without ever raising her voice. I want to be clear about Nina. She was not a soldier. She had never been to the DRC, never held a rank of any kind. She was a small, precise woman with reading glasses. She pushed up her nose when she was thinking hard. And she had spent her entire career in rooms like this one, doing the work that nobody outside those rooms ever thinks about. When this story is told, it will probably be told mostly about the ships and the engagements and the tactical decisions. Nina's work in those negotiating sessions was as important as any of it. More important maybe, because what she was protecting was the part that would last longest. By day 22, we had agreed on 11 of the 37 items. By day 28, we were down to the final clause, the record. Veldaro had returned to the table personally for the final session. He was flanked by the Kethra legal team and by representatives from the 6 remaining coalition species. On our side, me, Torres, Nina, and 3 other members of my delegation. Velduro laid out his final counter-proposal. It was, to be fair, the most reasonable version they had offered. The record would be public. It would be archived in the main Concord database. It would cover the full 3 centuries. But it would be framed as a joint historical review, rather than a formal acknowledgement of specific debt and obligation. And the language of acknowledgement would be softened in ways that Nina had already flagged to me in a handwritten note before the session began. I read the proposed text. I read it twice, then I took out my own version, the original clause. The one from the 37-line document Torres had handed me under a mountain. "This is what we asked for," I said. "This is what we will sign. Not a version of it. Not a restructured framing of it. This exact text." Veldaro looked at me across the table. He was not smiling. He had not smiled once in any of the negotiating sessions, and I found I did not miss the smile at all. This version of him, tired, stripped of theater, facing arithmetic that did not work in his favor, was, I thought, more honest than anything I had seen from him in 11 years. "Commander Marin," he said slowly, "you understand that signing this will be difficult, politically, for our member governments." "I understand that," I said. "I also understand that it is accurate. If the truth is politically difficult, that is not our problem." He looked at me for a long moment, then he picked up his stylus. He signed. The formal ceremony was held in the same chamber. Of course it was. I'd insisted on that detail, and nobody fought me on it. The same chamber, the same central dais, the same seats, though the arrangements were slightly different this time. My seat was not in the back corner with the small screen and the poor acoustic feed. My seat was at the center table, directly across from Veldaro, with a display that was the same size as everyone else's. I wore a new diplomatic sash, not blue. The Earth Diplomatic Office had designed new ones for the occasion. The same open-hand emblem from our ship's hull, embroidered in white on a dark background, simple, clean, an open hand pointing down. The chamber was full. Every Concord species had sent representatives, including several who had withdrawn from the coalition early, and were now present with the particular care of people hoping no one would bring up their original vote. The observation gallery was at capacity. Transmitters from 40 relay stations were recording. I looked around the room before I sat down. I had spent 11 years in this chamber, in the back corner, watching and speaking and being looked through. I had folded a sash on a table here and walked out. I had sent 2 words to a contact address I had been holding for exactly that message. I sat down. The reading of the agreement took 40 minutes. Every clause, every item, read aloud in full for the record. The debt structure, the sovereign recognition, the High Council seat, and at the end, the final clause, the record, read word by word as I had written it, as Nina had defended it, as Torres had backed it from the beginning. A formal acknowledgement. Public archived, non-retractable. 300 years of specific, documented human contribution to the welfare of Concord member species. Named events, named people, named amounts, named sacrifices. Not a general tribute. A specific account, including the names of the 214 humans who died in the Vorkai plague response, including Dr. Ewan. I heard Counselor Preth, sitting 3 seats to my left, make a very soft sound when that name was read. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on the text. When the reading ended, I signed. The stylus was heavy in my hand, the way a stylus is heavy when you understand the weight of what you're putting your name to. I signed carefully, clearly, the way I had been taught to write as a child. Every letter complete, no shortcuts. When I set the stylus down, the chamber was very quiet. Then, Counselor Preth began to press his hands together in the Vorkai gesture that means, in their language, something like "I was here. I witnessed this and I will carry it." Others joined slowly, then not so slowly. Not everyone, but enough. I did not feel triumph. I want to be honest about that. I had expected to feel something larger, something that matched the scale of what had just happened. What I felt instead was quieter and stranger. It was the feeling of a door closing that had been open too long. The sound of it, the finality of it, and then the simple fact of a room that was different for having been closed. Torres touched my shoulder briefly as she walked past behind me, heading for the door. No words, just that. Outside the chamber, in the same long corridor where I had sat on a bench 2 months ago and held 2 words in my head until I was ready to send them, I walked slowly, not to anywhere. Just walking. The corridor was empty. I thought about the 51 names on my casualty list. I had updated it every day. I thought about all the names before those. The 8,000 in Shinari space, the 214 from the plague response, the others across decades of conflicts and crises that humanity had walked into not because anyone made us, but because we were the kind of people who walked toward trouble when others were hurting. We had been that kind of people for a very long time. Had the war changed us? I turned that question over and over as I walked. Had the act of finally responding, after 300 years of patience, altered something permanent in how we understood ourselves? I did not think so, but I thought it had clarified something. Being kind when it costs you nothing is easy. Being generous when you cannot afford to be otherwise is called charity. But being kind after everything we had endured, knowing exactly what we were capable of, having demonstrated it, having stood on a bridge and given orders and watched people carry them out and paid the price of those orders in names on a list, choosing, after all of that, to come back to the table and write a peace agreement with fairness built into it, refusing to strike civilian targets even when it would have been faster, releasing prisoners with dignity, treating the Kethra station commander with the same standards we would have wanted for our own people. That was not weakness. That had never been weakness. It was the most difficult thing we had ever done, and it was ours, and nobody could take it from us. I came out at the end of the corridor through a side door that opened onto an observation platform. The station's exterior view was spectacular from there. A wide sweep of stars, the curve of the gas giant the station orbited, the distant smear of the galactic core above the equatorial plane. I had never been out to this platform in 11 years of working in this building. I had been too busy, or too tired, or had simply not thought to find it. I stood there for a long time. 6 days later, I was at the landing pad when the first cultural exchange shuttle arrived. It was a Kethra vessel, small and civilian, with the new exchange program's designation painted on the hull. Torres stood a few meters back, arms folded, watching with the expression she wore when she was paying close attention to something without wanting it to show. The ramp descended. A young Kethra diplomat came down it slowly. She was young, clearly young, in the way her species showed youth, with the lighter banding on her facial plates and the slightly uncertain angle of her posture. She was wearing a formal traveling uniform that was impeccably pressed but slightly too large for her, the way formal clothes are when you are not yet quite the person you will be when you have been wearing them for years. She reached the bottom of the ramp and stopped. She looked at me. I could see what she was seeing. A human woman of middle years, in a dark sash with an open hand on it, standing at the edge of a landing pad on a planet she had been taught, her entire life, to think of as the home of the bleeding hearts. A species too emotional for full membership, a species that had 2 months ago mobilized 14,000 warships and taken the Concorde apart at its financial foundations. She was deciding, I could see her deciding, whether to be afraid. I smiled at her, not diplomatically, not for the record, not because the moment called for a gesture. I smiled because she was young, and she had come here, and whatever her government had told her about us, she had packed a bag and gotten on a shuttle and descended a ramp onto a world she had never visited, and that took something genuine. She blinked. Then, slowly, the Kethra equivalent of a smile crossed her features, a subtle shift around the flat planes of her face, the widening of her secondary eyes. Commander Marin, she said. Her human language pronunciation was careful and clearly practiced. I am honored. The honor is ours, I said, and stepped forward to greet her. Behind me, I heard Torres exhale, a small, quiet sound, the kind that is not quite a sigh and not quite a laugh, the kind that means something true just happened. I did not look back. We had grown weary of being kind, that part was true. The weariness had been real. 300 years of it, deep in the bones of our civilization, in every unreturned favor, and every name on every memorial, and every vote in a chamber where we sat in the back corner with the small screen. We had grown weary, but weary is not the same as finished. We chose war because it was necessary, because patience has limits, and because allowing yourself to be endlessly diminished is not actually kindness. It is the slow loss of everything that makes kindness meaningful. You cannot give from a place that has been hollowed out. You cannot be genuinely good to others if you have no self left to be good from. We fought. We paid for it. We won, and the winning cost us things that did not grow back. And then, with full knowledge of what we were capable of, with the weight of 51 names carried deliberately rather than left behind, with our eyes open to every choice we were making, we came back. We set the terms. We signed the agreement. We built the record. We opened the door. We smiled at a young diplomat at the bottom of a ramp, and we meant it. That choice, made freely, knowing everything. Knowing the 2 words and the 14,000 ships and the names and the grief and the capability and the cost. That choice, made by people who could have chosen something harder and colder and did not, was the most human thing we had ever done. Not the patience, not the war, not the victory, the return. That was us. That had always been us. And whoever came after, Kethra or Vorkai or Shinari or any species not yet named in any language, they would find it in the record. Specific, Documented, non-retractable. Exactly what we were. Exactly what we chose. Every word of it true.